Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Gerard Pratt, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Lieutenant Commander Christopher Doherty. Today, we remember the 75th anniversary of the invasion of Papua. After the Battle of the Coral Sea was thwarted, the Japanese planned to invade Port Moresby in May 1942. The Japanese responded with a longer-term two-pronged assault on the Australian territory of Papua. Forward positions would be established at Buna on the northeastern coast of Papua and later at Milne Bay, and proceed overland to Port Moresby. The first landings occurred near Buna and Gunner on the 21st of July 1942. Establishing a beachhead, the Japanese force quickly advanced. Meeting opposition from the Maroubra force, then consisting of 4 platoons of the 39th Battalion and elements of the Papuan Infantry Battalion. The Kokoda Trail campaign had begun. It was to be a gruelling and brutal experience for all involved. While the fighting was some of the most desperate and vicious encountered by Australian troops during the Second World War, starvation and illness claimed more Japanese lives than in combat. The men of Maroubra force, many of them poorly trained, fought a stubborn rearguard action, but could not prevent the Japanese advance. Worn out and severely depleted, in late August, they were relieved by troops returning from action in North Africa. By mid-September, the Japanese were just 30 kilometres from the Allied airdrome at Port Moresby, but withdrew on the 26th of September. They had outrun their supply lines and received orders to withdraw after the reverse at Guadalcanal. The Australian pursuit through the isolated, mountainous, jungle terrain began, encountering bitter opposition in October and then success in November. Japanese forces at Buna and Gona continued fighting until January 1943. Today we remember the invasion of Papua. We pay our respects to the men and women commemorated here on the Roll of Honour and to the survivors who returned home. Today we're honoured to acknowledge Rear Admiral Mike Brown, United States Navy retired. We also welcome the Superintendent of the Seoul National Cemetery, the Republic of Korea. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony from across Australia. During the ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by Southern Hills Christian College, Bedford Dale, Western Australia; Kalamundra Christian Primary School, Walston West, Western Australia; and Our Lady of Good Counsel School, Gatton, in Queensland. They will also be joined by visitors to the memorial. I'd invite you all now to please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Children, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through until the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those listed on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we pay tribute to Lieutenant Colonel William Taylor Owen. William Owen was born on the 27th of May 1905 in Nagambie, Victoria, to William and Ida Owen. In the years before the war, he worked as a bank officer and married Daisy Green. Owen served with distinction in the militia, joining the Melbourne University Rifles in 1931 and attaining the rank of sergeant. In 1936, he moved on to the 29th 22nd Battalion, where he was promoted to captain in late 1939 and major in April of 1940. He enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 8th of July 1940 at the age of 35 and was posted to the 2nd 22nd Infantry Battalion with the rank of major. The 2nd 22nd arrived at Rabaul, the administrative centre of New Britain, in late April and combined with the local unit of the New Guinea Volunteer Rifles and other Australian units to form Lark Force. Lark Force spent the following months constructing defences and training for operations in a tropical environment. But it was ill-equipped and in no position to successfully defend its position against an enemy attack. Japanese bombing of New Britain began in early January 1942, increasing in intensity as the month continued. By the 22nd of January, Lark Force had withdrawn from Rabaul, waiting on the western shores of Blanche Bay for the inevitable Japanese landings. Owen's Alpha Company was positioned at Vulcan Beach and bore the brunt of the Japanese landing. After fighting for several hours, Owen ordered his men to break contact, as were in danger of being cut off. Lark Force was rapidly overwhelmed, and Colonel John Scanlon ordered a withdrawal on the basis of every man for himself. Groups ranging from company strength down to pairs and individuals sought escape along the north and south coasts of New Britain. Some found small boats and got away on their own. Others were picked up by larger vessels operating from New Guinea. Approximately 160 Australians captured by the Japanese while trying to escape were massacred at Toll Plantation. Another 836 were interned as prisoners of war. Owen and his men faced a harrowing battle of survival in the mountains and along the southern coast. They were among only 400 who managed to escape New Britain. After recuperating in Australia, Owen was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and assumed command of the 39th Battalion on the 7th of July 1942. The 39th Battalion was preparing to deploy to the mountain village of Kokoda on Papua, and the first troops left the day after Owen assumed command. He was flown up, arriving as Bravo Company was engaging the enemy. Facing overwhelming odds, the Australians were pushed back. Owen ordered a retreat to Daniki, but when the Japanese did not occupy Kokoda, Owen led his men back to try to reopen its airfield to receive reinforcements and supplies. 2 transport aircraft circled the field, but unsure if the Japanese were present, could not land. On the evening of the 28th of July, the Japanese began attacking in force. The company of about 140 men attempted to hold their position against the advancing force, but at 3 a.m. the next morning, the Japanese stepped up their attack. Owen was shot above the right eye. He was taken to a hut being used as an aid post and examined by Captain Geoffrey Doc Vernon. His condition was grim. With their commander mortally wounded, the enemy at their flank, and coming under accurate artillery fire, the Australian line collapsed. The troops were forced to withdraw. Owen could not be moved. He was cleaned up and left as comfortable as possible. On the 9th of August, when members of Alpha Company of the 39th Battalion retook Kokoda for a few days, Owen's body was found and buried in the vicinity of Graham's house at Kokoda. His body was later reburied at Bamana War Cemetery near Port Moresby. Owen was posthumously mentioned in dispatches and received the United States Distinguished Service Cross for his extraordinary heroism in action near Kokoda, the first Australian to receive this award. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among some 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian Memorial. We now remember Lieutenant Colonel William Taylor Owen, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you all for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.